there's a balance, I feel, in telling your story of all the successes you've done. And, look at what we've done here. Look what we did here. And versus providing value.
So it needs to be able to translate into the hero of the story being the lesson that's learned. Not so much you as the person that was in the experience, but the lesson you learned along the way is the thing that's the real hero and the value of that lesson. If you want to stand out, tell your story.
Welcome to Future Driven. I'm Adam Lejeunekopp, and on this podcast, we talk about challenges and wins in business. See the vision, drive the future.
Welcome to episode 48 of the Future Driven podcast. I am excited to have Mark Carpenter from Master Storytelling. Mark, thanks so much for joining me today.
Adam, it's great to be with you and your listeners. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I love your title. So we got to start that out with the Chief Storyteller, Mark Carpenter from Master Storytelling. And that title makes complete sense. And so this one should be easy for you to dive in, tell us some stories. At the beginning, I always like to get a little bit of background, so give us a little bit of your professional career. You don't have to go all the way back, but give us a rundown of your career to date. What brought you up to today?
Excellent. And I will put that into the perspective of what we're talking about rather than going into every single detail, because I know your listeners are not going to be very interested in that. But I started my career in marketing communications and public relations. 10 years I worked with a bank. 10 years I worked with some high-tech companies, a variety of different software companies during that time. And yeah, I used story a lot during that, telling the story of the company. I really felt like public relations was an opportunity for me to interpret my company to its various publics and interpret those various publics back to my company, back to my leaders too. So there's a lot of storytelling involved in that. At the same time, I got involved in doing some teaching as an adjunct professor and taught some communications courses, and then transitioned into a different career in consulting and facilitation. About 4 years ago, ended up writing this book, Master Storytelling: How to Turn Your Experiences into Stories That Teach, Lead, and Inspire, with a good friend of mine, Daryl Harmon. And we wanted to take our years of facilitation and really using stories as an intentional way to drive a point home and help people really understand something, and take that and put it into a book and put it into a workshop where we could teach other people to do the same thing, to not just disseminate information or just throw facts and information out there, but to get the information across in a way that people will remember it and act on it in the ways that we want them to.
Well, that's great. And, storytelling is such a big part of our lives from the very beginning with our kids all the way to business and capturing the consumer's attention. What is it that you think that happened in your career? What I guess lines of field, or what did you see that made you kind of go down this path that storytelling is so important that you essentially built a company, a workshop, a brand around it? What kind of catered to that?
Well, several things along the way. You know how that is. It's never just one thing. It's usually a combination of things. I do remember an experience, and I put this in the book. We were leaving a group meeting in one of the technology companies that I was working with. And, those after meeting conversations where you're just chit-chatting a little bit before you go back to your individual desks. And something came up, and I told some experience, some story about it, and everybody was laughing. And our new intern, Josh, looked at me and said, "Man, do you have a story for everything?" I said, what do you mean? He said, "It doesn't matter what topic comes up. You have some story that relates to that topic." And I thought about it, I was like, ooh, I kind of do. And so that's kind of my background as a person who knows how to tell stories and just uses stories very, very naturally. But about 5 years ago, I had helped a friend write a book. I basically did some ghostwriting for him on this book. And I was talking to my wife afterwards, and I said, "I feel like I need to write my book now, but I don't know what my book is." And as a good life partner will do, she looked at me and she says, "Oh, I know what you need to write." And my response was, "Well, wait, how can you know if I don't know?" And she said, No. This is what you do. You need to write a book about what you do very naturally. You need to write a book about taking everyday experiences and turn them into stories that teach lessons and that teach important points. And my first reaction, because of who I was and the experience I just shared with you about Josh, I was like, no, that's just what people do. He said, no, you do it more naturally, but you can help other people do that more intentionally. And that became the genesis of this book, Master Storytelling, and the workshop that goes along with it. And I found out in talking to people that my wife was right. No surprise there, right? That my wife was right.
You usually are, right?
But that's the right answer all the time, isn't it? My wife is right. But there were a lot of people who said, yeah, I would love that. I would love to get more direction on how to do that, because I get it. I get that it's important. I'm not sure I'm always doing it right. And I don't have anything to guide me in that process. And so that's what we built in Master Storytelling, was a guide for people to be intentional about the way that they take their everyday experiences and turn them into stories that teach, lead, and inspire.
Okay, great. So, so through your experiences, your natural experiences, obviously, and how that kind of folds into, give us a little breakdown of the workshop, a bit of an outline of the book. How does your process work so that people can get a taste of master storytelling?
Yeah, well, I won't go into a lot of detail on this first part, but we do talk about why storytelling is important and some of the brain science around it. I think we intuitively know, because we as human beings, we're story creatures. We love stories because we live stories. That's really what our lives are, these little slices of stories that we have. But there's some actual really good brain science around why that is and why that's important. So we talk some about that in the workshop and in the book as well. But when we get into the actual telling of the story, it's really structuring it in a fairly simple way. There are a lot of people who teach storytelling, but they teach it in some complicated 8 or 9 or 12 step process of how to create your story. And we really get it down into 3 major chunks about an introduction, where you're setting the stage and creating who the relatable characters are and their worthwhile goals, and then some kind of conflict that gets in the way of that goal that creates a problem, that creates a barrier, and then the resolution or the change that comes because of some action that was taken, either a change that was taken to overcome that goal or an action that was taken that didn't work, that we can learn from, that there's a lesson learned in that and how we can overcome that. And so we really focus on taking everyday experiences and putting them within that structure so that they're more intentional. A lot of times people will sit down and, you go home from work and you sit down and people say, how was your day? Or what was your day like at work? And you share the experience that you had at work, but it's not an intentionally crafted story because there's no intention behind it. And so what we're looking at is, how do you take those little slices of life and make them more intentional so there really is a lesson learned that you can pass on with that story?
That's great. So a lot of the listeners are small to medium-sized businesses in various industries and tech backgrounds. And so storytelling is, in my world, that gets lumped in with marketing, right? And marketing is a necessity / it's usually one of the first things to get cut when things get tight. So how do you help combat other business owners and executives on the need for consistent storytelling and how that will consistently fill the top end of their funnel, and so they're less selling when they need to and more about storytelling constantly, and then the right leads will kind of come at the right time?
Yeah, I love the connection that you made there, Adam, with storytelling and marketing. And it's really just storytelling and business as a whole. But in my mind, marketing is your whole business. People who say, well, we're short on funds, let's cut marketing, that's just cutting your business off, because that's going to be the source of any leads that you get into to build your business in the first place. And I would challenge people to look at the marketing within their specific industry and just read what other people are putting on their websites, in their email copy, and everywhere else. And If you can do it, have somebody else take the name of the company out and read it. And I'll bet you'll read those things and they will sound 95% exactly the same. If you want to stand out, tell your story, because your story is going to give you a unique voice. It's going to give you a way to stand out above all that mushy marketing mumbo jumbo that you typically get when people are particularly starting a business and they say, well, okay, this is what a business sounds like. But if you're doing it as to what a business sounds like in your marketing, you're going to sound like everybody else. But instead, if you say, what's my unique story? What's my unique voice out there? What's the story that my customers need to hear that's going to lead them to say, yeah, they're talking to me. I need to work with this person. I can trust this person. They have what I need. That in your marketing is going to stand out above everybody else's because it's not going to be the same. It's going to be your unique voice.
So one of the things you keep mentioning is, tell your story, tell your story. So how important is it that, I think I know the answer to this question, but how important is it that you show the human side of yourself, like show the quirks, the unique things, the things that maybe are not exactly related to what you're doing, but that's what makes you unique. That's what makes you relatable, which is kind of what you're getting at with tell your story. How much do you lean into really being unique versus being what the market feels like you need to be?
Yeah, and I always tell people, be yourself, but be your very best self. Now, that doesn't mean that you hide all the flaws, but it means be authentic, be real, and be who you are. You used a great word embedded within your question, which was relatability. That when you can show people, yeah, I'm a human just like you, and we've had the same challenges, and here's what I did to try to overcome them, and I failed, and then I did this, and I succeeded. That people are going to resonate with that because we've all been there. Nobody's had an experience where or nobody's lived a life where they've never failed at something. We can all relate to that. And if you try to present yourself as somebody who's never failed at anything, that's not going to be relatable for people. It'll come across as a little bit phony. So I think show your warts every once in a while. Show where you've made the mistakes. But the more important thing than showing your mistakes is show the lessons you learned from those mistakes, because that's what you want to convey to people. What did I learn from that? And how did I overcome that? And if you join me in this journey, I can help you overcome some of those things too. That's the message you might want to send with that story that you're telling.
So one of the things that I personally struggle with, and I'm sure many others do as well, when we're storytelling, like let's say on LinkedIn, right? There's a lot of storytelling being done on LinkedIn, and there's a balance, I feel, in telling your story of all the successes you've done, and look at what we've done here, look what we did here, and versus providing value. Hey, here's a trick that I learned, or here's what we do to solve this problem. What's your kind of guidance on a balance between the two, and where do they come into play?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm going to tell my story, and I need to be the hero of every story I tell, and that's a mistake. I think it's not so much that you're the hero of the story, even if you did have success. But it's the lesson that you learned along the way that's the hero of the story, because that's what's going to be relatable to your people that you're talking to. How can they succeed from this? Not just, oh, look what I did, and I'm going to pat myself on the back here and show you how wonderful I've been, but here's where I succeeded, which is why I can help you succeed. And here's how you can be successful. So it needs to be able to translate into the hero of the story being the lesson that's learned. Not so much you as the person that was in the experience, but the lesson you learned along the way is the thing that's the real hero and the value of that lesson. And again, that's where you'll stand out, because that's, to your point, is where you're going to make value. Your question came down to how do we add value with that story, and that's it. It's in the lessons that we learned from those experiences, conveyed in a good story, that are going to help people with their struggles, with their challenges. And to me, that's how you create value for people.
That's great. So a lot of what you're talking about is lessons, right? So we're learning a lot of lessons daily in our personal lives, in our business life, and so it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a foundational part of your storytelling is to identify the lessons, articulate the lessons, and then how do you leverage that moving forward? Because this is an endless infinity jersey. This is an endless journey towards building a business on whatever it is, right? For comfort for your life, financially, time. There's all these different motivating factors of why people do what they do. And so we learn lessons and we apply them. So the next time it's easier, it's faster, and whatever. And it feels like that's a big part of your storytelling.
Yeah. And not only do we learn, but we get reminded of lessons sometimes in our lives. That you know how it is. We learn something, and sometimes we have to relearn it or just get reminded of it over and over and over again as to how to get things done, or how to make sure we're being successful, and how we're helping other people succeed as well. Because it's not just about me on my journey; it's about me taking other people along their journey and being the guide for them along that process. It goes back to a word I keep saying, and that's intentional. It's leading into your story with, what is my intent here at the end? What am I trying to convey? And I think that's a mistake that sometimes people make in storytelling in business, is they say, well, here's this great story. I'm just going to tell you the story and just let it sit out there. But if you don't have an intent at the end, your story may not lead people in the direction that's going to be helpful for them. I'll give you a quick example. Over the holiday season, the end of 2022, I was visiting my son, and he had gotten a basketball standard for his family, one of those portable ones that has the plastic base that you fill with water. Well, I was helping him put it together. Okay, now, have you ever followed those instruction manuals on those some assembly required things? Like, sometimes I think those are the three most frightening words in the world: some assembly required.
Yeah.
And we're following through this instruction manual, and a lot of it was just pictures of where to put things. And we found some hardware in one package and some hardware in a different package, and we're struggling to get it together. And picture my son and I with our heads huddled over the instruction manual, trying to figure out what that picture means. And he says to me, I just want to get inside the brains of the engineers that put this together, just to see how they think, because they do not think the same way that I think. And it was such a great point and a great reminder to me that when I talk to people, I need to consider, what's their background? What's their knowledge base? What's their understanding? I am sure the engineers that put that manual together look at it and go, this is so obvious. This is so simple, because they had such deep background in it. And especially when you work in technology, that's something to keep in mind. What do the people I'm talking to actually know versus what I know? And my story can help convey those things in a way that's helpful for them, better than me just giving them technical data, specifications, features, benefits, and all those kinds of things. The story can help guide them along that path, as long as you're thinking of it in terms of, what do they also know? And so that's just a good reminder lesson of, keep focused on who your audience is and what they need to know. And if I'm intentional about that story, I'm going to help them get to where I need them to be.
So again, you're constantly providing value to others first, for it to then, at the right time to circle back, and then your position as a subject matter expert, your position as someone that can help, all of the things that we as business owners and drivers are looking to connect with the right people at the right time.
Yeah. And so, for example, that story that I just told about my son and I putting together the basketball standard, well, I sent that out to my email list. And at the end, I said, and so if you need help being more intentional about how you connect with your audiences in your story, contact me. I can help you to do that. I can give you some strategies to think through, what does my audience know, so that you're more intentional and more specific about how you convey that information to them. So you can circle back with your stories to, here's how I can help you in overcoming that challenge that I just reminded you that we all have.
That's great. So switching a little bit towards the future, Mark, where do you wrote the book, you said 4 years ago? Does that sound about right?
Correct.
And so where do you move forward from here? Tell me a little bit about the workshops, what you're doing there, and kind of what the future holds.
Yeah, it was an interesting time because we put the book out and then we created the workshop, and we launched the workshop in late 2019 or 2020. Yeah, 2019, yeah. Late 2019. See, I've been losing track of my time. This is what the pandemic has done for me. Right. And so you get the point that I'm making. We started launching this right as we went into the pandemic.
Right.
And then, of course, everything shifted because we were looking at it as doing in-person workshops. And then we converted it over to virtual really fast. And now we've started to build some community around the virtual. So I'm just looking at building it more into some specific areas, particularly into sales and in business leadership. Those are two specific areas that I think we can have a great impact on. Just getting more specific to those audiences, seeing it grow, and also seeing more in-person events with master storytelling where we can get back to that, because I think that's a really valuable format for something like storytelling, to have some really hands-on practice with it where you're getting in the moment coaching and feedback. But we're looking at just growing that a lot over the next 5 years and creating a world of intentional storytellers that help other people and that teach, lead, and inspire with their own stories.
Oh, that's great. Well, that sounds really exciting, and I think are the virtual workshops, are those working and going? What does the format look like for that?
Yeah, and so when we do the virtual workshops, we do it in 3 90-minute sessions over 3 days, which actually works really well. It works better than I thought it was going to when we first shifted over to it, because it gives people a chance to take a few principles on one day, start applying them, come back and build on those the next day. And then the third session of that, on that third day, they come back and they actually have a story that they're going to tell. And they get feedback in small groups about how they used the principles of storytelling, and they walk away with a story that's all ready to go.
And so when you have this story ready to go, and how do you navigate and help people determine how quick or how often you revisit it, how often you tweak it versus, kind of letting it ride and rolling with it?
And storytelling, like any other skill, is something that you continue to refine, you continue to hone, and you can continue to develop. I'm a tennis fan. I used to be a tennis player. And so I watched the professional tennis players play in the big tournaments. And I know that they're still working on those very basic shots. They're working on the forehands. They're working on this, and they're refining them just point by point by point. Storytelling is the same way. And the best way to refine is to practice it. Tell your story, look at your audience, see how they're reacting to it. Listen to the things that resonate with them. Particularly if you can do it in person, you'll see on their faces the points that are really striking home to them and the points that confuse them. And use that as good data to refine your stories going forward. That's the best way to get better at it, is just to keep doing it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it sounds like that's way good advice for a lot of things in life, Mark. So
absolutely. Again, it's a skill, like many other skills. It's just keep working on it, keep refining it. That's how you get better.
Oh, that's great. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you coming on. And one final question I'd like to ask my guest is, in the future, what will you be driving?
Yeah, in the future, I think I will be driving a team. Right now, I'm doing a lot of this on my own, but I'd like to expand in the next 5-10 years to where I'm driving a team of people who are helping others to intentionally tell their stories. And so I don't know if that's exactly what you mean by driving, but that's what I think of in terms of driving, is I'm driving my results in that direction.
I intentionally have left it a little bit open. Some obviously are a little bit more literal. I liked your answers, so that's great. Mark, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story, and look forward to seeing your company and you grow in the future.
Thanks so much, Adam. Appreciate that. And best wishes for you. Keep up the good work with this podcast.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mark.